Princess Adesua lived in the peaceful village of Odour, a lively town known for its rich vegetation and the people who lived very simple and contented lives. Her father, King Tunde Adesanya, ruled the village with kindness and incredible wisdom, while her mother, Queen Abiodun, had a very soft spot. She was known across the kingdom for her gentle heart. Princess Adesua, their only daughter, was admired for her beauty, her dark, radiant skin, and graceful presence, which made her stand out amongst other maidens and young girls in the village. However, her beauty came with pride, and this pride often pushed people away. As a member of the royal family, Adesua was raised to believe that she was above the common people. This made her walk with her head high and her heart closed off from those around her. The people in the village respected her, but they also feared her cold attitude. Whenever she walked through the village with her palace guards, people murmured and whispered behind her back. They said she lacked humility and was too proud to talk about anyone but herself. In the village, it was customary for young people to show respect to their elders. Adesua, however, thought that she was too important to follow such customs. One day, while walking along the dusty road with her guards, she passed by an elderly woman named Folake. Folake was 80 years old and well respected in the village for her old age and wisdom. She wore a faded cloth wrapped around her frail body, and her wrinkled hands held a small cane for support. When Folake saw the princess, she smiled warmly and said, "My daughter, don't you see me? Don't you have manners?" But instead of greeting her, Princess Adesua looked at the old woman with disgust. "You smell too bad, and you are too wrinkled for me to notice," she said harshly, turning her nose up. The guards stood by, shocked by the princess' words. Folake's smile faded and her eyes filled with anger. She pointed a finger at Adesua and said, "You are proud now, but soon people will run away from you. Only flies will be your company." Unbothered, Princess Adesua brushed off the woman's words and continued her walk, not realizing what had happened. The old woman had cast a powerful spell on her, which would change her life forever. Over the next few days, something strange began to happen. Every time Adesua spoke, a strong, unpleasant smell filled the air. It wasn't just bad, it was unbearable. The odor came from her mouth, and even though she couldn't see it, she could smell it herself. People who were once drawn to her beauty now kept their distance away from her. They whispered about her as she passed. But this time, it wasn't just about her beauty and pride. It was about the horrible smell that followed her everywhere. At first, Princess Adesua didn't understand what was going on. She tried covering her mouth with a fan, but the smell was still there. Slowly, the villagers stopped speaking to her altogether. Even the palace servants avoided coming near her. She noticed that even her parents began to keep their distance during meals, though they never said anything. Adesua's world was changing, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alone and lonely. She didn't know the full power of the curse that the old woman, Folake, had placed upon her. But soon, the effects of the curse would become too impossible to ignore. The days turned into weeks, and Princess Adesua's once perfect life crumbled before her very own eyes. Her mouth odor, which started as a small smell, grew stronger with each passing day. At first, she tried to ignore it, thinking it would go away, but it only worsened. The smell was so terrible that it filled any room she entered, and people could smell her even from a far distance. Adesua's beauty, which had always been her pride, no longer mattered at this point. People were more concerned with the unbearable odor that followed her everywhere she went. Dignitaries from far-away lands who once traveled long distances to seek her hand in marriage no longer came near. When they did arrive at the palace, they would leave as quickly as possible, disgusted by the foul smell. Adesua's heart sank as the suitor who once admired her beauty began to avoid her. One of the notable princes, Prince Ayomide from the kingdom of Zin, had been betrothed to her since birth. Their engagement was supposed to unite the two kingdoms and bring prosperity to both lands. However, when Prince Ayomide visited Udali to meet Adesua, the odor hit him before he even spoke a word to her. As soon as he approached her in the grand hall, the smell made him step back in disgust and horror. He struggled to keep his composure, but quickly excused himself, claiming an urgent matter needed his attention. He left Udali without ever looking back. Days later, Princess Adesua received the news that Prince Ayomide had married another woman. This left her shattered and depressed. The humiliation of losing her betrothed because of her condition was more than she could bear. She spent her night crying, feeling abandoned and helpless. Her pride, which once shielded her from the world, now left her vulnerable and exposed. Her father, King Tunde, was deeply troubled by his daughter's condition. He spared no expense in searching for a cure. He called upon the finest doctors and herbalists from across the kingdom, hoping they could find a solution for his daughter. But no matter what remedies they tried, whether it was bitter herbs, expensive oils, or strange potions, the odor remained. The king even consulted wise men from neighboring lands, offering them gold and treasures in exchange for their help, but none could cure the princess. Adesua, who was already growing desperate, tried everything she could think of. She drank countless concoctions, applied oils, and even chewed on herbs that were said to remove bad odors, but nothing worked. Rather, the foul smell only grew stronger and stronger, and the more she fought against it, the more hopeless she felt. As time passed, the princess began to isolate herself in the palace. She no longer walked proudly through the village, and she stopped attending royal events. Whenever there was a banquet or celebration, Adesua remained in her room, too ashamed to face the world. She could hear the whispers of the palace servants outside her door, talking about how the beautiful princess had become a prisoner of her own condition. What a shame. Her once large circle of maidens, friends, and admirers dwindled to nothing. The young women who used to visit her in the palace now made excuses to stay away. They no longer wanted to be associated with someone who had become the subject of cruel jokes and gossip in the town. Even the palace guards, who once followed her proudly, now kept their distance. Adesua's life, once filled with joy and pride, became lonely and painful in the twinkle of an eye. The walls of the palace, which used to feel like a sanctuary, now felt like a prison to her. She spent her days gazing out of her bedroom window, watching the villagers from afar. They seemed so happy and carefree while she was trapped in a life of shame and isolation. She could no longer recognize the girl she once was. Her world had become dark, and she didn't know if she would ever find a way out. Princess Adesua's world was one of deep darkness and isolation. Her father, King Tunde Adesoya, had spent a fortune seeking a cure for her condition, but nothing worked. The strongest herbal treatment and the most advanced remedies from distant lands failed to rid her of the terrible mouth odor that plagued her. Each failure only made her feel more hopeless. Desperate for help and a solution, Princess Adesua tried everything. She chewed bitter leaves, soaked in strange oils, and even resorted to burning incense in her room, hoping the scent would overpower the smell. But it was of no use. It was completely useless and futile. Her breath remained offensive, and with every passing day, she withdrew further from the outside world. The king, Tunde, was heartbroken. He watched his daughter suffer every day. Queen Abiodun also was in constant despair, though she never spoke of it openly. The palace, which once filled with music, laughter, and people, was now silent. Princess Adesua had stopped attending royal functions and hid herself from visitors. Even during meals with her parents, she sat in silence, covering her mouth and refusing to engage in their conversations. Her condition was not just physical, it had broken her spirit completely. She no longer had the confidence or pride that once defined her. Even the palace servants, who used to admire her from afar, avoided her like a strange disease. They whispered about her condition behind her back, and Adesua often overheard them as they passed her door. One day, a festival was held in the village. It was the annual celebration of the harvest, and the whole village gathered in the village square. There was a lot of music, dancing, laughter, and excitement, and for the first time in many months, Adesua had an atom of hope within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could join the festivities without anyone noticing her presence. Of course, it was a very large crowd, so she could be in the midst of people without being spotted. Princess Adesua had missed the joy of being around people, and she craved for this moment. She wrapped a scarf around her mouth to try to contain the smell and made her way to the village square. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. She watched the villagers dance and sing, and for a brief moment, she felt like her old self again. But then, she made the mistake of singing along with the crowd, and as soon as she opened her mouth, the foul odor escaped, filling the air around her. The villagers quickly noticed and began to cover their noses. Their joyful expressions turned into disgust. People ran in every direction, trying to escape the horrible smell. Humiliated and heartbroken, Adesua ran from the square, with tears streaming down her face. She fled to the outskirts of the village, where a small bush marked the border between her town, Odour, and the next town. She collapsed by a tree, sobbing uncontrollably, feeling more alone than ever before. As Adesua sat beneath the tree, her tears drying on her cheeks, she heard the sound of a drum in the distance. The steady rhythm seemed to call out to her, pulling her away from her sorrow. Then she looked up and saw a young man approaching. He was playing a small Yoruba talking drum called a gángan. His music was light and joyful, and his face was full of warmth and kindness. "Hello," the young man said as he stopped in front of her. "Why are you sitting here alone on such a beautiful day?" Princess Adesua wiped her eyes and tried to hide her face, fearing that he would run away from her like everyone else. "Please, don't come near me," she said. "You don't want to be close to me." The young man smiled and sat down beside her, ignoring her warning. "My name is Kunle," he said, gently tapping the drum. "And I've been playing this drum since I was a child. Why are you so sad?" Princess Adesua hesitated for a moment, but something about Kunle's kind eyes and gentle tone made her feel safe around him. She told him about the curse, about how she had been insulted by an old woman and was now living with the consequences. Kunle listened carefully, never flinching or pulling away from her. When she finished, she looked at him in disbelief. "Why are you still sitting here?" she asked. "Everyone else runs away." Kunle smiled again. "I have noticed the smell." "Yes," he said, "but I don't judge people for the things they can't control. Your condition doesn't define you. What matters is your heart." For the first time in what felt like forever, Adesua smiled. Kunle began to play his drum again, and without thinking, Adesua stood up and began to dance. She danced freely, moving with the rhythm of the drum, feeling the weight of her sorrow lift from her shoulders. In that moment, she felt like herself again. Kunle and Adesua continued to meet in the same spot by the bush side, near the river border. They spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing stories about their lives. For the first time in a long time, Adesua felt happy. She wasn't alone anymore, and Kunle made her feel accepted. Weeks passed, and Adesua's meetings with Kunle became the highlight of her life. Every few days, she would sneak away from the palace to meet him at their secret spot by the bush. Kunle's drumming and their conversation filled her with a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in months. But Adesua still couldn't shake the fear that her mouth odor would drive Kunle away. Even though he never mentioned it, she wondered if he secretly found it unbearable. One day, while they sat together under the tree, she finally asked him, "Kunle, why do you stay with me? Don't you smell it?" Kunle paused for a moment, then looked into her eyes. "Yes, I do," he said softly. but I stay because I see the person behind the condition. I care for you, Adesua, and your heart is more important than anything else." Adesua was stunned by his words. No one has ever spoken to her like that before. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that Kunle truly cared for her despite her curse. In that moment, Kunle took her hands and confessed his love for her. He asked her to be his, and Adesua, overwhelmed with emotion, said yes. Kunle took her to meet his family, and they welcomed her with open arms. But when Adesua entered Kunle's home, she froze. Sitting in the corner of the room was Kunle's grandmother, Folake, the same woman who had cursed her many years ago. Adesua's heart raced. Folake, now frail and about 100 years old, sat quietly in the corner. Her once sharp eyes were now clouded with age, and she didn't seem to recognize Adesua. Adesua dropped to her knees in front of the old woman, with tears streaming down her face. "Please forgive me," she begged. "I was wrong to insult you all those years ago. I didn't know the pain I would cause myself." Kunle and his family looked on, confused by the scene unfolding before them. Adesua explained everything: the curse, the odor, and how it had ruined her life. Folake, too old to remember much, listened quietly, but after a few moments, she sighed and nodded. "I remember now. My child," she said softly, "I cursed you in anger, but I have the power to lift it." Folake instructed the family to mix a glass of water with salt. She handed the glass to Adesua and told her to hold the water in her mouth for 2 minutes. Adesua did as she was told, but her heart was pounding with anticipation. After 2 minutes, she spat the water out, and immediately she felt different. The foul odor that had plagued her for so long was gone. The family rejoiced, and Adesua hugged Folake, thanking her for her mercy. The curse was finally lifted, and Adesua's life could begin afresh. Adesua returned to the palace with a new sense of hope. She told her parents about everything: how she met Kunle, how she got the curse, how the curse was lifted, and how she had found true love in Kunle. King Tunde and Queen Abiodun were extremely overjoyed that their daughter was finally free from the curse. But the king hesitated when he learned that Kunle was a commoner. "You cannot marry a man who is not of royal blood," the king said firmly. "He is not worthy of you." Adesua's heart sank. She loved Kunle deeply, but she knew her father's pride was a difficult barrier to overcome. For days, she locked herself in her room, refusing to eat or speak to anyone. The palace was filled with sadness, and even the queen, Abiodun, couldn't bear to see her daughter so heartbroken. One night, Queen Abiodun spoke to the king in private. "Our daughter has found true love," she said. "She has suffered enough, and she deserves to be happy. The status of the young man she marries does not matter as long as he loves her." King Tunde thought about his wife's words, and the next day he called for Kunle and Adesua to come to the palace. When they arrived, he looked at them both with a heavy heart. "Kneel before me," he commanded. As they knelt, the king placed his hands on their heads and blessed their union. "You have my blessing," he said. "May your love bring peace to our family and our village." 7 days later, Princess Adesua and Kunle got married in a grand wedding ceremony. The wedding ceremony of Princess Adesua and Kunle was a grand and colorful celebration that united the entire kingdom of Odour. It was held in the royal palace. The king's courtyard was decorated with bright fabrics, palm fronds and flowers, giving it a festive feel, with beautifully woven ashoke fabrics seen almost everywhere. The princess Adesua was well dressed in a beautiful traditional outfit. She was dressed in a rich, intricately beaded iro and buba with a matching gele, and she walked with grace and pride on that occasion. Her attire was adorned with coral beads around her neck and wrist. Her skin glowed with the radiance of a woman who had found love and freedom. Kunle, dressed in agbada made from the finest traditional fabric, looked regal as he stood waiting for his bride. Kunle was surrounded by his family and drummers playing the gong talking drum. The ceremony began with the traditional Yoruba rites, led by the village elders and priests. Family members, friends, relatives, and well-wishers from both families gathered to bless the union, offering kola nuts, alligator pepper, and palm wine, which served as symbols of unity and prosperity. The climax of the event was when Adesua knelt before her parents and the king to receive their blessings, while Kunle's family presented gifts to the royal family as part of the dowry. As the couple exchanged their marital vows, the sound of traditional drums, flutes, and songs filled the air, and the crowd cheered joyfully as Princess Adesua and Kunle became husband and wife. The celebration continued with cultural dances, and everyone who came to the occasion were entertained with different dishes. They feasted on jollof rice, pounded yam, egusi soup, and grilled meats, all accompanied by a taste of the local palm wine. There was so much eating, drinking, and dancing on that day, and the people partied late into the night. The entire village celebrated this union, and their love story became the talk of the town. Princess Adesua, the once cursed and lonely princess, had finally found true love, which redeemed her from her troubles. Thank you for watching this beautiful African folk tale, and if you enjoyed this story, please leave a like on this video. Make sure to also leave a comment, and if you are yet to be a subscriber, smash that subscribe button now. When you subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell, you will be the first to know when we drop amazing African stories and tales like this one here on our page. Thank you once more for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.